The sun was barely up when I stepped onto my driveway in my slippers, coffee warm in my hand, thinking I had a quiet Saturday ahead of me. That illusion shattered the second I saw two police cruisers turning onto my street, lights flashing softly as they rolled to a stop in front of my house. Not rushing, not dramatic, just slow, heavy, and exhausted, like this was a call they'd answered far too many times before. Across the street, Karen Whitlock stood on her porch like a self-appointed judge, phone raised, fingers stabbing the air in my direction. She was yelling about illegal parking, about my truck ruining the neighborhood, about how someone needed to finally put me in my place. She looked triumphant, certain she had me cornered this time. The irony was almost painful. My truck was parked fully inside my own driveway. Not on the road, not on her property, not violating a single rule. This wasn't the first time she'd called the police on me. It wasn't even close. For weeks, she'd been trying to get me punished, reported, removed. Anything to feel powerful. What she didn't know was that she'd already been calling my workplace, filing complaint after complaint about a so-called dangerous officer. And she had no idea that officer was me. Not just an officer, but the base commander she was reporting to. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Gone Wild. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I moved to Maple Ridge for one reason, and one reason only, my daughter Lily. After my wife passed away, everything in our lives felt temporary. Bases, rentals, short stays, boxes that never really got unpacked. I was done with that. I wanted roots. I wanted a place where Lily could ride her bike without looking over her shoulder, where nights were quiet, and where home finally meant something solid again. Maple Ridge looked perfect, a small town tucked just far enough from the highway to stay quiet. Tree-lined streets, well-kept houses, no homeowners association breathing down anyone's neck. No boards, no bylaws, no monthly meetings where bored people pretended to have power, just neighbors, lawns, and space to breathe. Or so I thought. The problem lived directly across the street. Karen Whitlock noticed us before we even finished unloading the moving truck. While Lily carried boxes inside, I caught movement from the corner of my eye. Karen stood behind her front window, curtain pulled just enough to watch without being obvious. Or at least, she thought she wasn't obvious. When I made eye contact, she didn't wave, she didn't smile. She just kept staring, like she was already making a list. Within days, the watching turned into documenting. When Lily rode her bike up and down the sidewalk, Karen stood on her porch with her phone angled just right. When I parked my truck in the driveway, Karen walked the edge of her lawn like a surveyor, counting steps, measuring imaginary lines. When I took the trash cans out one evening and brought them in a little later than usual, a neatly printed note appeared on my door the next morning. It quoted township ordinances, bolded and underlined, most of them completely misapplied. At first, I tried to be neighborly. I introduced myself. I told her we were new to town. I explained that it was just me and Lily now. I even apologized once for something that didn't actually need apologizing for, thinking maybe that would calm things down. Maybe she just needed reassurance. Maybe she was lonely. Maybe I was misreading it. That was my mistake. Karen didn't want understanding. She didn't want compromise. She wanted control. Once she realized I wasn't going to tiptoe forever, the calls started. First to the township, then to code enforcement, then to the police. Every call followed the same pattern: urgent tone, dramatic language, and accusations that never matched reality. My grass was overgrown. It wasn't. My truck was blocking traffic. It wasn't. Lily was unsupervised. She wasn't. Each time, an official showed up, looked around, sighed, and quietly confirmed that everything was fine. And each time, Karen got louder, more offended, more aggressive, like being told she was wrong was an insult she couldn't tolerate. What really surprised me was how quickly she escalated past local nuisance and into personal attack. Somewhere along the line, Karen figured out where I worked. She found out I was stationed at the nearby Air Force base, and in her mind, that became a weapon. She started calling the base directly, demanding to report a dangerous officer who was intimidating the neighborhood. She used my name. She exaggerated everything. She painted me as unstable, aggressive, and threatening. What she didn't understand was how systems actually work. Every complaint was logged. Every phone call was recorded. Every allegation was checked. And every single one came back unfounded. I never raised my voice. I never confronted her directly. I never gave her the explosive reaction she clearly wanted. I just kept living my life and documenting hers. The police officers started recognizing me. They'd knock, apologize under their breath, and tell me they knew what was going on. One of them finally said it out loud. Karen had a history. Long before we arrived, she'd been doing this to other families. Couples who worked odd hours, renters, anyone who didn't fit her idea of how the street should look or behave. Some of them had moved away. Not because they were wrong, but because they were tired. That realization settled something inside me. I had uprooted my life too many times already. Lily had lost enough stability. I wasn't about to let a self-appointed neighborhood tyrant run us out of yet another place. Karen may have thought persistence would wear me down. What she didn't realize was that patience, when paired with documentation, is far more dangerous than anger. And this time I wasn't going anywhere. Karen changed the moment she realized politeness wasn't going to scare me into submission. Once she understood that I wasn't going to move, apologize endlessly, or bend myself into whatever shape she demanded, her behavior shifted from passive, aggressive to obsessive. She started tracking my routines like it was her full-time job. She timed how long my trash can stayed at the curb, standing across the street with her phone out as if she were clocking a criminal operation. She measured how long my garage door remained open, pacing back and forth and jotting things down on a clipboard I swear she bought just for this purpose. At one point, she called code enforcement because my truck, according to her, looked aggressive. That was the exact word she used. Not loud, not obstructive. The calls multiplied, sometimes 2 in a single day, sometimes back to back. Code enforcement would show up, then leave. Police would knock, then apologize. Nothing ever came of it, and that only seemed to enrage her more. She wasn't looking for resolution. She was looking for validation, and every calm dismissal felt like a personal attack. One afternoon, as I was pulling into my driveway, Officer Nolan Reyes stepped out of his cruiser before I could even shut the engine off. He didn't look stern or suspicious. He looked uncomfortable, almost embarrassed. This was the third time he'd been dispatched to my address in the span of a few weeks, all for complaints that dissolved the moment he arrived. He lowered his voice and told me, off the record, that Karen was flagged in their system as a habitual caller. She had a long history of nuisance reports, exaggerated claims, and complaints that never held up. The problem, he explained, was that being difficult wasn't illegal. Unless she crossed a very specific line, their hands were tied. They had to keep responding. That conversation was the moment everything clicked for me. That night, after Lily went to bed, I installed cameras. Front yard, driveway, side of the house, nothing invasive. Nothing aimed at Karen's windows or her property. Just enough to document what was happening on mine. I made sure everything was clearly visible, clearly legal, and clearly defensive. By the next morning, Karen had already noticed. She stormed onto her porch, phone pressed to her ear, pacing like she was narrating a crime scene. Within an hour, I had another knock at my door. This time, she was accusing me of surveillance intimidation, claiming I had installed cameras specifically to threaten her. The responding officer glanced at the cameras, glanced at my property line, and calmly explained that homeowners were allowed to protect their homes. Karen screamed anyway. That was when she shifted tactics again. If the town wouldn't punish me, and the police wouldn't scare me, she decided she'd go higher, much higher. Karen started calling the Air Force Base directly. She demanded to speak to someone in command about a rogue officer who was, in her words, terrorizing the neighborhood. She used my full name. She described me as unstable. She claimed I made threatening gestures. She alleged I was abusing my position. She thought she was clever. What she didn't understand was how rigid those systems are. Every call she made was logged. Every complaint was recorded. Every accusation was written down, time-stamped, and verified. And every single one came back false. No threats, no misconduct, no aggression. Just a neighbor with a driveway and a woman who couldn't stand that she didn't control it. What Karen never bothered to ask, never even considered, was where those complaints actually went. She assumed they disappeared into some anonymous void. She imagined faceless administrators scrambling because she raised her voice. In reality, each complaint followed a very clean path, logged at the front desk, routed through proper channels, reviewed by command staff, and then forwarded up the chain, straight to my desk. I sat there late one evening, scrolling through printed summaries of her accusations, reading her words laid out in black and white. Dangerous, aggressive. All lies, all documented, all signed with her name. Karen believed escalation would finally break me. What she was really doing was building my case for me, line by line, call by call, without realizing that the person she was trying so desperately to destroy was also the one reviewing every single complaint she filed, and she still had no idea who she was actually reporting to. Karen's confidence didn't come from winning. It came from never being stopped. Every time one of her tantrums ended without consequences, she treated it like validation. In her mind, silence meant fear. Polite explanations meant weakness. And the fact that I stayed calm only convinced her she was getting closer to breaking her target. So she decided to go public. A notice appeared on the town website about a special agenda item for the next council meeting. Something about residential parking concerns on Maple Ridge Drive. I knew immediately who was behind it. Sure enough, the night of the meeting, Karen marched in carrying a thick manila folder like she was heading into court. She sat in the front row, back straight, chin high, eyes locked forward as if the room belonged to her. When her turn came, she walked to the podium and laid out her case with theatrical seriousness. She claimed our street was being endangered. She said large vehicles were creating hostile conditions. She talked about declining property values and neighborhood safety, all while pulling out glossy, printed photographs of my truck taken from multiple angles, close-ups, wide shots, morning light, evening light. It was unsettling how much effort she'd put into it. She spoke like she was presenting evidence of a crime. I sat quietly near the back, listening as she referred to me only as that man across the street, as if I wasn't even worth naming. Heads turned. People whispered. A few neighbors looked uncomfortable, clearly recognizing the exaggeration but unsure whether to speak up. Then Councilwoman Teresa Hall leaned forward. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't look impressed or annoyed. She just asked one simple question. Is the vehicle parked on public property or private property? Karen hesitated for the first time all evening. You could see the gears grinding in her head as she realized the answer wasn't going to help her. Private, she said sharply. But, Teresa held up a hand, cutting her off. Then it's legal. That was it. No debate. No follow-up, no sympathy. Karen snapped. She raised her voice, accused the council of ignoring residents, claimed favoritism, claimed corruption, claimed they were letting intimidation slide. The longer she spoke, the more people shifted in their seats. What had started as a complaint unraveled into something else entirely. Raw entitlement mixed with desperation. Teresa let her finish, thanked her for her time, and calmly tabled the petition. Karen stormed back to her seat, red-faced and shaking, whispering furiously to anyone who would listen. After the meeting adjourned, I stood to leave, hoping to slip out quietly. Teresa stopped me before I reached the door. She didn't say my name out loud, but her look said she knew exactly who I was. She asked if we could talk privately. Outside the chamber, away from the noise, she lowered her voice and told me she was aware of my position at the base. More importantly, she was aware of Karen's. Karen worked at the commissary, a civilian position, one that came with very clear expectations about conduct, professionalism, and misuse of authority, especially when it involved harassing service members. Teresa didn't mince words. She said Karen's behavior had crossed from neighborhood nuisance into something more serious. Filing false complaints, misusing public resources, attempting to influence policy for personal vendettas, and now dragging federal employment into it. She asked me a question I'd been expecting for weeks. Why haven't you shut this down? I told her the truth, because I didn't want to win by flexing rank. I wanted this handled cleanly, as a citizen, through the same channels Karen had been abusing. I wanted her actions documented. I wanted consequences that stuck. Teresa nodded slowly. She said that approach would matter later. Karen left that meeting humiliated, but not humbled. And humiliation, I learned quickly, only sharpened her resolve. Within days, the calls increased, louder, more frantic. She told neighbors the council was covering for me. She told anyone who would listen that I was using military connections to silence her. She claimed she was being persecuted for standing up for the neighborhood. She began pacing the street whenever I stepped outside, phone visibly recording, muttering just loud enough to be heard. She sent emails to town officials accusing them of negligence. She started talking about lawsuits. I still said nothing. From her perspective, my silence looked like fear, like avoidance, like weakness. From mine, it looked like patience paying interest, because every email she sent, every accusation she made, every escalation she chose after that meeting only deepened the paper trail she didn't realize she was creating. She thought the council loss was temporary. She thought doubling down would force someone to break. What she didn't understand was that she had already crossed the point of no return. She just hadn't felt it yet. Karen believed she was fighting for control. In reality, she was tightening the noose herself, one public outburst at a time. Karen's next move arrived in my mailbox on thick paper, the kind meant to intimidate before you even read a word. A formal demand letter, legal letterhead, bold claims, dramatic language. According to her attorney, I was causing her emotional distress, disrupting the neighborhood, and abusing my position. If I didn't immediately comply with a list of absurd demands, how and where I could park, when I could use my driveway, even how often I could be outside, she would escalate the matter to federal authorities, the media, and anyone else she thought might panic me into submission. I read the letter twice, slowly, carefully. Then I laughed, not because it was harmless, but because it crossed a line so cleanly that it finally gave me exactly what I needed. That afternoon, I walked the letter down the hall and placed it on the desk of Captain Elise Morgan, our base legal officer. Elise had spent years untangling real problems, contract disputes, investigations, matters where people actually understood the gravity of lying on paper. She adjusted her glasses, skimmed the first page, then the second. Halfway through, she stopped and smiled. "Sir," she said calmly, tapping the letter with her pen, "this just became easy." She explained it in plain language. Karen's attorney had done us a favor. The letter wasn't just bluster. It was a documented escalation built on provably false claims, emotional distress without evidence, allegations of misconduct contradicted by official reports, threats to involve federal channels already proven to be abused. It wasn't a warning. It was leverage. And it wasn't on my side. It was on hers. That was the moment the situation stopped being reactive and became deliberate. We started building what Elise called the binder. Not a folder, not a stack of papers, a binder. Thick, indexed, structured, every section labeled, every document placed in chronological order. It wasn't emotional, it wasn't dramatic, it was methodical. We included every police call Karen had made, cross-referenced with incident reports showing no violations, every township complaint and its resolution, screenshots of emails, video clips from my cameras showing her pacing, filming, gesturing, and shouting at an empty street, logs of her calls to the base, complete with dates, times, and summaries of her accusations, even notes from officers who had responded multiple times and quietly confirmed the pattern. Nothing speculative went in, no opinions, no assumptions, just facts. Every entry was time-stamped, verified, backed up. Elise explained something Karen clearly didn't understand. These systems don't respond to volume. They respond to patterns. And Karen had created a pattern so clear it practically highlighted itself. While we worked, Karen grew louder. Her lawyer sent follow-up emails when I didn't respond. The language became sharper. Deadlines appeared. Threats escalated. She told neighbors she was taking me down. She posted vague messages online about corruption and intimidation. Careful not to name me, but obvious enough for anyone on the street to know who she meant. Each outburst went straight into the binder. She didn't realize that by involving an attorney so early and so recklessly, she had locked herself into her own narrative. Every new claim had to match the last. Every accusation had to escalate to justify the previous one. She couldn't walk it back without admitting she'd lied, and she couldn't prove it without evidence she didn't have. From her point of view, silence meant fear. She told anyone who would listen that I was stalling because I knew I was in trouble. She mistook restraint for weakness. In reality, I was giving her room to talk. Elise and I met regularly, refining the binder, anticipating next moves. She explained how false reporting, when repeated and documented, stops being a nuisance and starts becoming abuse of process. How harassment shifts legally when it follows someone across jurisdictions, township, police, federal workplace. How retaliatory complaints, especially when they target employment and family, are treated very differently than neighborhood disputes. Karen thought she was pressuring me into making a mistake. What she didn't see was that she was the only one making them. Every time she exaggerated, the contrast sharpened. Every time she doubled down, her credibility eroded. Every time she accused me of abusing authority, the records showed her abusing systems meant to protect people. By the time her attorney sent a final warning, this one heavy with legal jargon and empty threats, the binder was already thicker than the letter deserved. Karen believed hiring a lawyer meant she'd finally gained the upper hand. She never asked herself why I wasn't scrambling. She never wondered why I hadn't responded in kind. She never realized that while she was trying to win loudly, I was letting her document her own downfall quietly. And by the time she figured it out, it was far too late to stop. Karen finally snapped when she realized the letters, the calls, and the threats weren't getting the reaction she wanted. Silence infuriates people who crave control, and she was running out of ways to force me to respond on her terms. It happened late one night. I heard a faint, sharp sound outside, the kind you don't register right away. By the time I noticed something was wrong, the damage was already done. The next morning, I walked out to my driveway and saw my truck sitting lower than it should have been. 2 tires completely flat. Deep, deliberate slashes along the sidewalls. I didn't shout. I didn't confront her. I didn't even cross the street. I checked the cameras. The footage was clear. Karen, hood pulled up, moving quickly, but not carefully enough. The angle caught her gait, her posture, the way she glanced toward my house before kneeling beside the tires. There was no doubt. I clipped the video, saved it, backed it up, and added it to the binder. When the police arrived, they already knew the pattern. They took photos, wrote the report, and told me plainly that vandalism changed things. This wasn't just complaints anymore. This was criminal behavior. Karen must have sensed that, because instead of backing off, she escalated in the most vicious way possible. A few days later, there was a knock on my door just after lunch. When I opened it, a woman stood there with a badge and a neutral expression. Child Protective Services. She explained, carefully and professionally, that they had received an anonymous report alleging neglect, instability, and an unsafe home environment. I felt my stomach drop. The allegations were absurd. Claims that Lily was left alone for long periods, that I was aggressive and unpredictable, that the home was unsafe. None of it was true. All of it was designed to hurt in the one place Karen knew would force a reaction. The investigator, Ms. Renee Caldwell, could tell immediately that something was off. She interviewed Lily gently, privately, and then spoke with me at the kitchen table. She looked around the house, checked the fridge, glanced at Lily's schoolwork spread neatly across the counter. Within an hour, she closed the case. She told me quietly that false reports like this were taken very seriously, that weaponizing CPS was considered retaliatory abuse, that the complaint would be documented, flagged, and revisited if the pattern continued. I thanked her. I stayed calm. I waited until she left. That night, after dinner, Lily finally asked the question she'd been holding in all day. "Daddy," she said softly, eyes fixed on the floor, "are they going to take me away?" That was it. All the restraint I'd practiced. All the patience. All the careful documentation and quiet strategy. It didn't break me, but it hardened something inside me that hadn't been there before. I sat beside her on the bed, held her until she stopped shaking, and promised her the truth, that she was safe, that no one was taking her anywhere, that I would never let someone hurt her like that again. After she fell asleep, I went back to the binder. I added the CPS report, the closure statement, the investigator's notes, the time stamps, the context. I didn't rush, I didn't skip steps, but I stopped waiting. Up until that moment, I had wanted this resolved cleanly, quietly, almost academically. I wanted the systems Karen abused to correct her behavior without me ever revealing who I was. I wanted accountability without spectacle. That changed the second she went after my child. From that point on, every decision had a different weight. This wasn't about a driveway or a truck, or even harassment anymore. This was about someone who believed there were no consequences for cruelty, no limits to escalation, and no lines she couldn't cross if it meant regaining control. I contacted Captain Elise Morgan that same night. I sent her the CPS documentation and the vandalism footage. She didn't sugarcoat it. "This is the line," she said, and she sprinted across it. We discussed next steps, not hypotheticals, not contingencies. Real actions, protective orders, criminal referrals, formal complaints supported by a pattern of retaliatory behavior. The binder was no longer just defensive. It was now the foundation for consequences. Karen thought slashing tires would intimidate me. She thought calling CPS would terrify me into silence. What she actually did was remove every reason I had left to be patient. The next morning, as I watched Lily walk to the bus, backpack bouncing lightly against her shoulders, I made a quiet promise to myself. Karen would never get close to my family again. Not physically, not emotionally, not legally. She believed pressure would make me crack. Instead, it did the opposite. It clarified everything. The courtroom was quiet in that heavy, expectant way that settles in before something final happens. Karen sat at the table across the aisle, whispering furiously to her attorney, hands fluttering as if motion alone might save her. She still looked confident, annoyed even, like this was an inconvenience she fully expected to talk her way out of. Then the door opened behind me. I walked in wearing full-dress blues. The sound of Karen's voice cut off mid-sentence. She turned just slightly at first, then fully, and for the first time since this all began, her face lost every trace of color. Her mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes flicked from the rank on my shoulder to my face, back and forth, as if she were trying to convince herself she was mistaken. She wasn't. I didn't look at her. I took my seat calmly, placed the binder on the table in front of me, and waited. The courtroom felt different now. The murmurs stopped. Even her attorney straightened. Suddenly far more alert than he had been moments before, Judge Evelyn Carter entered and called the room to order. She had the kind of presence that didn't require volume. When she spoke, people listened. She began by explaining that both restraining order petitions would be heard together, given the overlap in allegations. Karen's attorney nodded eagerly, clearly expecting to go first. They did. Karen took the stand with dramatic flair. She spoke about fear, about intimidation, about feeling unsafe in her own home. She waved vaguely in my direction, never quite looking at me, and claimed my truck was threatening. My cameras were aggressive, my silence was calculated harassment. She insisted I had used my position to scare her, to manipulate authorities, to make her look unreasonable. Judge Carter listened. She asked questions. Calm, precise questions. Dates. Evidence. Karen's answers grew less confident with each one. When asked why police reports consistently showed no violations, she blamed favoritism. When asked why township officials dismissed her complaints, she claimed corruption. When asked about the vandalism, she said nothing at all. Then it was my turn. I stood, swore in, and spoke plainly. No anger, no theatrics, just facts. I explained why I moved to Maple Ridge. I explained my attempts to be civil. I explained the pattern of complaints, the escalation, and the impact on my daughter. I placed the binder on the stand and opened it, section by section, exactly as it had been prepared. Judge Carter leaned forward. Police officers testified next. Officer Nolan Reyes described responding to the same address repeatedly for unfounded complaints. He confirmed Karen's status as a habitual caller and testified that my conduct had always been cooperative and calm. Another officer confirmed the vandalism report and authenticated the camera footage. Then Child Protective Services took the stand. Ms. Renee Caldwell explained the anonymous report, the investigation, and the immediate closure of the case. She stated clearly that the allegations were unsupported and appeared retaliatory in nature. When asked how such false reports were treated, she didn't hesitate. They are considered a serious abuse of the system, she said. Township officials followed. Emails were read aloud. Meeting minutes entered into evidence. Karen's failed petition was discussed, along with her outburst during the council meeting. By the time the last witness finished, Karen's attorney had stopped writing entirely. He sat back, hands folded, staring at the table like a man reconsidering every career choice that led him to that chair. Judge Carter took a long moment before speaking again. She looked at Karen, then at me. Her ruling was clear. My restraining order was granted immediately. Karen was ordered to have no contact with me or my daughter, directly or indirectly. She was prohibited from filing complaints or reports related to me without prior court approval. Karen's petition was dismissed with prejudice. Then the judge addressed the rest. She referred the matter for criminal investigation, citing evidence of vandalism, false reporting, and abuse of process. She noted the seriousness of weaponizing emergency services and child welfare agencies for personal retaliation. Her tone wasn't angry. It was disappointed, and somehow that felt worse. Karen tried to speak. Judge Carter shut it down. As the gavel fell, Karen slumped back in her chair, stunned. The confidence was gone. The narrative she'd built for months collapsed in a single morning, under the weight of her own actions. I closed the binder, stood, and walked out without saying a word. I didn't need to. Everything that mattered had already been said. The fallout didn't come all at once. It rolled in slowly, inevitably, like a tide that had been pulling back for months, before finally surging forward. Once the court order was in place, the noise that had defined our lives for so long simply stopped. No more calls, no more notes, no more pacing on the sidewalk with a phone raised like a weapon. The silence felt unfamiliar at first, almost unsettling, as if we were waiting for the next blow that never came. Karen lost her job within weeks. It wasn't dramatic, and it wasn't public. There was no confrontation, no scene, no shouting match in a parking lot. Just a quiet, formal termination after an internal review concluded that she had repeatedly misused her position and targeted a service member with false and retaliatory complaints. The same behavior she'd treated as a game finally had real consequences. She stopped leaving the house much after that. The legal consequences followed. Fines were issued for the vandalism and false reports. Court fees added up, and the judge's restriction on her ability to file complaints without prior approval effectively removed her favorite weapon. For the first time in years, Karen couldn't weaponize a phone call or an email. She couldn't pull authorities into her personal vendettas. She had to sit with the reality she'd created. The neighborhood felt it immediately. People who had kept their heads down for years started stepping outside again. Neighbors who used to avoid eye contact began stopping to talk. One family admitted they'd been planning to move before everything happened. Another said Karen had called the police on them years earlier over a backyard project that was fully permitted. Stories surfaced quietly, cautiously, as if people were testing whether it was finally safe to speak. It was. Within a few months, a "for sale" sign appeared in Karen's yard. She didn't tell anyone she was leaving. No goodbye, no explanation. Just boxes loaded into a moving truck early one morning, the same way she used to watch others move out. When the house finally sat empty, the street exhaled. Life didn't turn magical overnight, but it returned to something normal. The kind of normal you don't appreciate until it's gone. Kids rode bikes without being filmed. Lawns were mowed without being measured. People parked their cars without worrying about who was watching. The biggest change was inside our house. Lily started sleeping through the night again. The nightmares stopped. She no longer asked if someone was going to knock on the door and take her away. She laughed more. She lingered outside after school instead of rushing indoors. Slowly, cautiously, she relaxed. That mattered more than anything else. As for me, I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel victorious in the way movies make these moments look. What I felt was relief. A deep, steady relief that came from knowing my home was finally just a home again. No binder on the counter. No alerts buzzing on my phone. No rehearsing conversations in my head before stepping outside. My truck stayed right where it had always been, parked neatly in my driveway, angled the way that made the most sense for backing out in the morning, not as a statement, not as a provocation, just because that's where it belonged. Every now and then, someone new would move into Karen's old house. They were quiet. friendly, normal. The kind of neighbors you wave to and then leave alone. Exactly what Maple Ridge had been supposed to be from the beginning. I kept the binder, though. It stayed tucked away in a drawer, not out of spite, but as a reminder. A reminder of how quickly control can turn into abuse, and how easily systems can be twisted when people stop questioning the loudest voice in the room. The street didn't need a tyrant to function. It just needed the absence of one. And in that quiet, ordinary peace, we finally found what we came to Maple Ridge looking for in the first place: stability, safety, and the simple comfort of knowing that no one was watching anymore. When I look back on everything that happened, I realize it was never really about where I parked my truck. The driveway was just the excuse. What this was always about was power, about someone who believed that being louder, more aggressive, and more relentless gave them the right to control the people around them. Karen didn't understand authority. She only understood the performance of it. She mistook tantrums for influence and complaints for leverage. She believed that if she overwhelmed the system, it would bend in her favor. For a while, that illusion worked because too many people chose silence over conflict. But systems designed to protect people don't fail forever. When someone keeps abusing them, eventually the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. I didn't win because of my rank or my job title. In fact, I avoided using it for as long as I could. What made the difference was patience, documentation, and refusing to be dragged into chaos. I let her talk. I let her escalate. And I let her words and actions speak for themselves, because the truth doesn't need volume to be heard. If you're dealing with someone like this in your own life, remember this: bullies thrive in confusion and fear. They depend on emotional reactions and impulsive mistakes. Structure is their weakness. Calm records, clear timelines, consistent facts. Those things take away their power faster than any argument ever could. Our home is quiet now, safe, normal. And that peace was worth every moment of restraint it took to get there. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Gone Wild. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from?